Welcome back to week 10 of Free Tendies. I'm here with Yanni. How's it going, man?
What's up, buddy?
A little tired this week. I was up late on Twitter. Great content last night. Anyways, let's get into the game breakdowns. And I'll start first. On Thursday night, we have the Bengals going into Baltimore to play the Ravens. This is one of the better Thursday night games, I think, of the year so far. The Bengals have an implied team total of 23 and a half points, and the Ravens have an implied team total of 30 points. For the Bengals, we're starting Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Mike Gesicki, and Chase Brown. And then we're sitting all of the other wide receivers and Khalil Herbert. Then for the Ravens, we are starting Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Mark Andrews, and Zay Flowers. And we're sitting Deontay Johnson and Isaiah Likely. So let's start with the Ravens first. This offense has just been absolutely popping off, firing on all cylinders. The only reason we have Deontay Johnson as a sit still is short week, right? Like last week, I believe he ran like 12 or 13 routes, something like that. No targets. I think that on a short week, he's probably going to be still in that getting used to the team kind of phase of his career as a Baltimore Raven. We'll probably adjust his positioning next week once he has another week of practice under his belt. Lamar and Henry, I don't think at this point we even need to explain anything about them. They're just locked and loaded, elite at their position, and they're going to be every week regardless of matchup. Zay Flowers as well. He's quietly had like a career year. I think he's like been over 100 yards like 4 or 5 times already. He had like 30 points last week. This is a soft matchup. This Bengals defense is not playing great. Like him here, and then Mark Andrews, based on that logic, right? The last time these two teams played, I think there was like 60 total points. It went to overtime. It was a great game. This is a Mark Andrews spot in a big AFC North divisional matchup. This seems like where Lamar would go to him, especially with Deontay still kind of getting used to the ropes. And we didn't even put Rashad Bateman on here. I would call him a sit. It's just now that Deontay's in town, I think your Bateman shares are toast. You can send him back to the waivers. For the Bengals, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, I feel like that's very easy too. Joe Burrow is quietly playing MVP level on a sub 500 football team. Still a great player, just sucks that the Bengals are poorly coached and have a terrible defense. Then Gesicki, this is an interesting start. Eric All Jr. went down with an ACL last year. It turned the three-headed tight end monster into a two-headed tight end monster. But Drew Sample is not a good football player. Gesicki had like I think he had 25 half PPR points last week. Granted, it was against the Raiders, and I don't know if anyone has seen the Twitter clip, but the Raiders basically did not guard Gesicki like for 50 yards, and he just waltzed into the end zone. The Ravens, they don't have a great pass defense either, but you know, I don't think it will be that easy, but we still like him as probably a top 12 option this week. Then Chase Brown. So here's the deal. Zach Moss went down this week with a pinched nerve, I believe, in his neck. There's worries that it could be like the Chris Carson injury back. For those of you new football fans, Chris Carson was a Seattle Seahawks running back. He had a neck injury pop up and like it effectively ended his career. Right now, the Bengals are saying that Moss is going to be out for the rest of the regular season, potentially returns to the postseason, but I don't know about that one. At least the way I have it is rest of the way. Chase Brown is like going to be a top 15, approaching top 10 running back rest of season. He got 32 touches last week, like 25 half PPR points. He's been getting work, passing work. He's been getting the run in between the tackles. He's dynamite. Love him in this spot. Even though the Ravens are like the best rush defense in the league, right? Like Chase Brown can get there other ways. He's an explosive player in what should be a pretty offensive matchup for sure. Then we're sitting the other wide receivers. Question for Yanni: is T Higgins out this week?
Looking like it.
Okay,
Looking.
okay. So if T
Jermaine,
Higgins was playing this game, we would have him as a start, right? But he's just not going to play, and Yoshi Boss and the other guys are ass. So, and then what were you going to say about Jermaine Burton? Probably.
Jermaine Burton caught at a casino Saturday morning walkthrough. Instead of going to the team, he went to a casino to gamble. So he's having some form of mental breakdown. It looks like it'll be Gesicki taking the wide receiver 2 role for him.
All right, interesting. I hope he watches our show, as we have been on fire on the gambling show. Then the last guy for the Bengals, Khalil Herbert. They just traded for him. The Bengals just traded for him from the Bears. Listen, I like Khalil Herbert as a player. I think that like it was just he was the odd man out in Chicago. I don't think he's a great player by any means, but I think he's probably a better player than Zach Moss. In the league that me and Yanni are in, I spent $20 a fab on Khalil Herbert this week because I had Zach Moss go out and the waivers are toast. I just needed the extra handcuff. I wouldn't suggest fantasy managers do that, but I mean, I would not mind putting him at the end of your roster, especially if you need running back help. But it's not going to be this week against this elite rush defense.
Okay, Giants at Panthers. Giants with an implied team total of 23 and a half. Panthers at home with an implied team total of 17. For the Giants, sort of questionable this year when you've wanted to start Danny Dimes, but we kind of know that he has this weird, not weird, I mean, he has this subtle fantasy upside when he has good matchups because he will run the ball. Had a few rushing touchdowns this year. He had a good game last week, and we're going to start him again this week because of the soft defense. Panthers really aren't scaring anyone. You have a good chance that he runs in a touchdown. You have a good chance that he throws a couple of them, albeit rare. It does happen in games where he has a soft matchup. Uh, roster dependent. If you need a streamer this week, though, I think he's a perfectly fine streamer. If you want a cheap DFS play this week, I think him and the Neighbors stack perfectly reasonable, man. If you want to chase something like that, Neighbors falling off a little bit, hitting that rookie bump a little bit. He's missed a few deep balls from Dimes where he probably would have had better weeks the last 2 or 3 weeks. Still a fantastic player. Should eat a matchup like this alive, even with the good corner over there for the Panthers. And then Tracy Jr. Tracy Jr. is an excellent football player, man. He was one of my favorite rookies coming into the year. I didn't draft any shares of him, which I kind of regret. But I just based on his preseason, I thought, God, this is a really good player. I grabbed him on a few leagues when Singletary went down. And he's sort of evolved into a weekly top 24 option with like top 15 upside. And especially in a matchup like this, dude, roll him out there, roll him out with confidence. I would say that's someone you need to be forcing in your roster at this point. And then for the Panthers, pretty straightforward. You're starting Hubbard. We don't want a whole lot of action on other guys in this offense. I'd prefer not to. If you want to take your pick on who you think is going to break out week by week, Leggett or Coker, I would probably prefer Leggett. Coker's, I think, either undrafted or a seventh round player who's had one good game this year. Leggett's had a few good games and is basically a first round pick. He went up that 1-2 border. I think he went 32. I think he is a first round pick. And just more talented, bigger guy, more ways that he gets there. I prefer Leggett. I have Leggett rostered in a few leagues. I think I have him in like 40% of my rosters, actually. I have Coker in one league just in case. I have a bunch of injuries there. I'll figure out hold on to him for one more week. But really, Coker, Young, Leggett, I probably don't want to be starting any of them. Hubbard, roll him out there. Even with Brooks coming back, I highly doubt he gets the workload now, but do keep an eye on that split. We didn't put him on here, but Brooks and Sanders are both sits this week. I wouldn't start him the first week off of his injury. I hope your roster's not at the point where you have to do that. He'll be on here next week. We'll see where he falls. That's
Yeah.
all I got.
So this one, just to clarify, right? When we say Sanders, it is not Miles Sanders. It is Jatavian Sanders. He was actually featured on the free agent episode this week. He was one of my guys. I remember during that episode, I could not remember the name of the tight end that was starting in front of him that got injured. It was Tommy Tremble. Tommy Tremble is coming back this week. That's why I have Jatavian Sanders as a sit because I don't know who's going to get the work or who's going to be primarily running as the one this week. If Jatavian Sanders gets more work, though, right? If he's kind of operating as the one now and Tommy Tremble is thrown back into the back of I don't know, like is the tight end too, or if they just ask him to block or whatever. I don't mind Jatavian Sanders going forward. It's just I would need to sit him here. And then, yeah, I love the dime spot this week. Dimes has been. I have a roster with Danny Dimes, and he's been over 20 points, I think, like 4 times this year. Like he's been if you guys are best ball players, Danny Dimes has been surprisingly good for best ball, and you were getting him in like the 18th round. Listen, we're not under the illusion that he's a good football player, but this Panthers defense is terrible. That cannot be stated enough. Regardless of whether or not Derek Carr made them look competent, they are not. Fire up your Giants with the utmost confidence here. Next, we got the New England Patriots going into Chicago to play the Bears. Fun fact: the Bears are undefeated at home this year. Just in case you didn't know that. The Patriots
Actually,
are.
that is
Oh,
surprising.
I
That is
know.
surprising.
Yeah. So they're the Bears are undefeated at home and they have not won on the road this year. Coincidence? Who knows? The Patriots have an implied team total of 16 points. The Bears have an implied team total of 22 and a half points. For the Patriots, we're starting Ramondre and we're starting Hunter Henry, and we're tricky decisioning Drake May. Then for the Bears, this is a mess. The only clear cut start we have for you is DeAndre Swift. And then we're tricky decisioning DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, Caleb Williams, and Cole Kmet. So let's start with the Patriots first. I think this one's a little bit easier. Um, Listen, it's a very concentrated offense at this point. Drake May, like we've been harping on the past couple weeks, he's keeping these guys alive. The reason he is a tricky decision, because I think in neutral to plus matchups, Drake May is going to be a start for us. I think pretty regularly here. It's just that this Bears secondary is very good. Even in a blowout last week to the Cardinals, I think they allowed like 150 yards passing to Kyler Murray. The way to attack this Bears defense is the ground and pound, which stylistically is a good matchup here for the Patriots. That's what they want to do. Assuming their offensive line can hold up on blocking, it should be a good Ramondre spot. And then Hunter Henry, right? This is one of my favorite back end tight ends that I've been telling you guys to go pick up. Listen, it's not that he is George Kittle out there, right? It's that he's getting enough looks in an offense that doesn't have any dominant guys. It looks like a lot of times, especially in an offense like this, he'll be the security blanket. He'll be the first read. I think he's averaging like 5 or 6 targets a week since Drake May has taken over. There's an argument to be made that he is a one or the one in this offense effectively. And we didn't put Pop Douglas on there. I'm going to say his name though is a tricky decision because I'm starting him this week. I like it. Well, I don't like it because the Bears secondary is good, but I have no choice in that league, and I like the player. Then for the Bears, this is a disaster. So DeAndre Swift, he is actually a good football player. I know people were telling you earlier that he was bad, telling you to try and sell high. Listen, the Bears line sucks, but he's still a good player, and when he finds room, he's able to get yards and be productive. This Patriots defense is not an elite one. We like him here in the spot. And then for all the pass catchers, right? This is just entirely a function to me of how does Caleb Williams look in this game, right? There were kind of signs earlier in the year, right? Like Caleb got off to the terrible start. All of a sudden, he started playing better. I kind of got excited, right? I thought he had finally made it. Turns out, I don't know what happened after the bye. I don't know if it's they just started playing teams with more effective pass rushes. I don't know if it's Caleb regressing. I don't think it's Caleb regressing. But the fact of the matter is, he has been really bad these past couple weeks. He was brutal against the Cardinals, sacked 7 times, running for his life. He was brutal against the Commanders. He's just not comfortable in the pocket at this point in time. He plays I was saying this in pre-show to Yanni. To me right now, Caleb is playing like a guy who does not trust anyone on his team and thinks that he has to make plays all by himself and is convinced every time he drops back he's going to die if he doesn't escape and run away. And because of that, right? Because he's not settling in the pocket, he's running around like a madman trying to make plays that aren't materializing. It's kind of killing the value of all these wide receivers. So I think Keenan Allen had like 10 targets last week. He got 4 points out of it. DJ Moore 8 targets, like 3 points out of it. Roma Dunze went over 100 last week against the Cardinals, but he's had a bunch of other dud weeks, right? Who are you going to trust on any given week? For me right now, it's tentatively DJ Moore, Roma Dunze, Keenan Allen in that order. But any of them are just subject to have a bad Caleb week. This Patriots defense is bad. They've been kind of carved up by other quarterbacks in other spots. There isn't an argument that Caleb has a good game here and these guys are startable. Just look at your roster, make a smart decision. And then Cole Kmet, same idea, right? He's just kind of an extra piece in this offense. If Caleb has a good game, he is live to also have a good game. But if Caleb has another one of these ones where he's struggling, running for his life, unable to orchestrate the offense and sustain drives, Kmet's going to be a zero. So it all really comes down to your evaluation of Caleb and what you think he's going to do in any particular game. Thoughts on this one, Yanni?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that even though Dunze had the big game last week, the only wide receiver I'm comfortable starting from the Bears is DJ Moore. That's it. And I know he's had 2 bad weeks in a row. I do still think he comes around. Um, Maybe in a week or two, we have to really evaluate that. Who knows? But for now, I would say he's the only guy I'm comfortably starting in their wide receiver room, including Cole Kmet. Okay, Bills at Colts. Bills with an implied team total of 25.5. Colts with an implied team total of 22. For the Bills, the so you're starting, you know who you're starting here, right? You're starting Allen, you're starting Cook, you're starting Shakir. You've been doing that all year. Shakir's actually been a sneaky underrated player all season. And against a soft defense like this, I love starting him and certainly putting him in my roster where I can. Amari, it seems 50-50 if he goes. They did not sound very committed to him this week when they said he's going. I don't really know, but whether Amari goes or not, I'm starting Keenan. I would be totally comfortable starting Amari this week if he's out there. So I think either way, you're good to go. The most interesting player on the Bills to talk about this year has probably been Kincaid. Um, a lot of the ADPs had Kincaid going like above Kittle, above Kyle Pitts. Some drafts I was in, he was going in the early fourth round. I mean, we're talking about like going before guys like Kenneth Walker, like Devonta Smith, like DK Metcalf, like Alvin Kamara. You had Kincaid going up there. Um, I got him in 2 leagues, but that was more like pick 65, 70, somewhere in there. He's been very disappointing this year, man. I don't disappointing because of what you were expecting. I guess for tight end, he's whatever. Um, he's still a start, right, against this defense. I would just say, like, if you guys went and picked up Kate Otten off the waiver wire, or like, go look at who picked up Kate Otten. If they have someone like Mark Andrews sitting on the bench, I would maybe tentatively be making other plans for him as the year progresses here, and especially in the playoffs. He's still a start for now. Last week, I believe we either had him as a tricky decision or a sit. We'll see. It's more a reflection of the defense he's playing, but Kincaid is not a locked-in starter. I think you kind of need to understand that and maybe plan your roster construction accordingly. If someone like Mike Gesicki is on your waiver wire with how he's performed with Higgins out this year, with how much he's getting used in the slot, I just keep all that in mind when you watch Kincaid this week. If he doesn't have a big game here, man, that's all bad. He's a start for us. But he needs to show up and start. For the Colts, there's really only two guys that are there's really only one guy who's a weekly starter, obviously, and that's Jonathan Taylor. And with the Flacco dump offs and with this soft rush defense in this game, we expect Taylor to have a fantastic game and a fantastic rest of season. I feel amazing about having him on my rosters. Good for you if you kind of bucked the trend and went running back early. I think most of my rosters that did that are doing the best of the ones that I have. And then Downs, that's just out of respect for how good Downs has been this year and how much chemistry he seems to have with Joe Flacco. This is sort of a tougher matchup on the passing end. He's a start this week. He's not a weekly start, I don't think. People were saying like he's a rest of season top 15 wide receiver, and I don't know. He's really good. I never saw him like that, but he should have a really nice week here, especially with the game script. And then Pittman Jr. injured again. He seems like he's been injured most of this year. Something's wrong. They almost put him on IR with his back. It hasn't felt good. I drafted Pittman in one league, and I thought I got a steal. It was a mid-fifth round pick. I thought, oh my God, that's a slam dunk. Huge mistake. He hasn't showed up. Flacco hasn't really helped the way we would hope. He's still been like a middling, low-end wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. So he's a tricky decision this week. I'm looking elsewhere if I can. Unless you absolutely have to start him in like full PPR, I don't really want Pittman in my lineups, to be very honest with you. And then sits Flacco. Look, man, if it's a really good matchup, like a really easy matchup, put Flacco in. The dude's like a 42-year-old soccer dad. He probably should, like he wouldn't be starting in the NFL if there wasn't this young quarterback developmental issue or the craziest regression we've ever seen out of anyone in Deshaun Watson. You just like he's not someone who would traditionally be finding his way on the field. It really is that we had this really weird thing where all these quarterbacks sort of fell out in this weird timing and then a bunch got hurt. He's that classic old man backup guy. And should he be in there slinging the ball 38 times a game? Probably not. It looked pretty rough last week. 2 QB leagues, super flex, whatever, you have him on your bench. I think it's perfectly reasonable to start him when you have to. But please, for the love of God, man, I'd hope you have other options in a 12-man, 1 QB league at this point in the year. So please sit him.
Yeah. I mean, I don't share that level of no thank you on Joe Flacco. I think at points he's been fine. I like the offense that he's in. I like his coach. I like the pieces that are around him, right? Not in this matchup though. This Bills defense, they are undersized. They are not good against the run. You can run on them. To me, this profiles as a Jonathan Taylor explosion spot. I think he's going to be inside my top 5 this week for fantasy running backs. Just pick your spots with Flacco, and then for the Bills. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but I gotta ask, where does Keon Coleman go on your list, or is he didn't make it because he's not fantasy relevant to you?
In 12 man and 10 and 12 man leagues, I don't think so.
I
He's like
mean,
a, you know, I don't, I cannot conceive of a roster where you're going, am I starting Keon Coleman this week? I can't even imagine who, like, I would start Sterling Shepard on the Bucks over Keon Coleman right
well, in theory, this is a soft matchup, right? I'm thinking if Amari goes, I would probably wouldn't do it, right? I think you're just kind of banking on too much to happen if Amari goes, but if he doesn't go, like to me, he would almost be a tricky decision, not one that I would be excited about, but one that
now.
in like a two flex league or something, right? Or you're flexing two positions, I could see an argument. If Amari doesn't go, do you like him as any sort of tricky decision, or is it just no
As a
thanks?
low end, as a low end emergency flex. If Amari's out and like you're looking at the wire, there's a lot of buys this week. There's been a ton of injuries. If you're looking at the wire and you're like, oh my God, I'm streaming someone this week, perfectly reasonable streamer.
Okay.
I just didn't. I don't even really think. Maybe I'm being too harsh about it. I didn't even really consider him someone that people have rostered in a lot of 12 man leagues. He's on the wire in a lot of my leagues. Maybe I'm being irrational about that.
I mean, I drafted one Keon Coleman share, right? I dropped him for someone else. Like I got rid of him pretty quickly, right? But I mean, I think this Colts matchup needs to be targeted is one that is a good one for a fantasy offense to be going up against. I don't know. Let us know in the comments if your Keon Coleman roster. Really interested to see. Next we got the Vikings going into Jacksonville to play the Jaguars. The Vikings have an implied team total of 25 points. The Jaguars have an implied team total of 20 and a half points. For the Vikings, we're starting Justin Jefferson, we're starting Aaron Jones, and we're starting Sam Darnold. We are sitting TJ Hawkinson, and we're tricky decisioning Jordan Addison. Then for the Jaguars, we're starting Brian Thomas Jr. and Evan Ingram, and we're tricky decisioning Trevor Lawrence and the running backs as a whole. So let's start with the Vikings first because I think this is more chalky, right? Justin Jefferson at this point, we don't really need to tell you he is like a top 3 to 2 guy at his position. He's money. He goes as Sam Darnold goes. I don't love Sam Darnold as the player, but this Jaguars team continues to disappoint in pass defense. They're bottom 3 in the league. This should be a good Darnold week. And Aaron Jones just continues. He just continues to get work and look good doing it. Shout out to him. If you drafted him in the 4th or 5th round, that was a good sneaky little pick. Like him this week, the Jaguars are a little bit better at rush defense, the pass defense, but they aren't great either. TJ Hawkinson is a sit for us. He was not on the field for all of the snaps last week against the Colts on Sunday night. I think that's to be expected as they ease him back into the offense off of the like horrific ACL injury. I think that until we start seeing Hawkinson playing a full-time role and getting a significant target share, they were just going to treat him as a sit until we see it, at which point we can reevaluate, right? So let him get that one good week on your bench if you were patient and held him, put him on IR. You can't stick him in IR anymore, but I still wouldn't stick him in your starting lineup. And then Jordan Addison, tricky decision. This is just kind of it's not consistent with Jordan Addison. I like him far more as a player than a fantasy asset at this point in time because the Vikings they're profiling to get ahead in this one and kind of run the crap out of the ball here. But if you're feeling, if you're feeling that can get in the end zone or anything else, I don't mind it here. Especially in like a flex position, I really don't mind him this week as a start. Then for the Jaguars, Brian Thomas Jr. He's back from his injury. He didn't have a great week last week, but it was good enough. He's like he's one of the most impressive rookie wide receivers that there's been this year, other than like neighbors, right? Like I think he has more yards than Marvin Harrison at this point in time. The Jaguars offense just doesn't have as many guys, and they should be down and throwing. So I like him here. Same with Evan Ingram. With Christian Kirk out, he's kind of started to dominate these short over the middle targets. He is the security blanket. In the tight end wasteland, you could do much worse, even though the Vikings, in theory, aren't a great defensive matchup. Trevor Lawrence, tricky decision. He's played okay at times, right? Like, he's clearly not the player that he was drafted as. He's clearly, I think, at this point in time, bordering on bust territory, but he can kind of get it done sometimes. It really just depends. Like, Superflex, you're probably forced to start him, like, unless you really drafted well at the quarterback position. But I don't love him this week. I would probably say mid to low end too. And then the running backs. This one's kind of interesting. So there's kind of been ETN came back last week, right? And when ETN, Bigsby, and Ernest Johnson are all playing, it's just a muddied up mess, right? It's a weird three-headed monster on a not very good football team, and nobody gets you there, right? So if they all are playing, I would start neither of them. I would call them all sits. But as of right now, it looks like Tank Bigsby is trending towards not playing in this one. If Tank Bigsby can't play in this one, there is an argument to be made that ETN would be getting featured, and ETN has had a good history in the NFL so far when Doug Peterson has decided to give him the work. Granted, he has been brutal this year. If you're an ETN roster, you probably fucking hate that guy. You're like, I cannot believe I wasted such a high draft pick on him. But if Tank misses, this could be a good spot for him, especially catching dump offs, that sort of thing. Well, I don't feel confident enough based on his production to call him a start if Tank misses, but I think there is an argument to be made that you might want to start him this week. So tricky decision to kind of middle ground it. What do you think, Yanni? Any thoughts?
Yeah, just a huge bummer about ETN. Him and Trevor Lawrence had played together for years. It felt like, I don't know, felt like he was always going to be that safe second round pick. And this year he's probably going to be one of the guys most correlated with missing the playoffs, if I had to guess. So just tough. Just tough is what it is.
I'm shocked the Jaguars didn't move him at the deadline. Honestly, I
I don't
thought
know.
for sure he was going to be someone they moved.
I don't know why you wouldn't at that point. And but yeah, I don't know what they're doing. I don't. They good chance they lose him for free. They're not going to re-sign him with the way things are trending there.
We'll see if Doug Peterson makes it through this week if they get their asses kicked. But TBD.
Good chance. Okay, Broncos at the Chiefs. Sort of an interesting matchup to see how legit the Broncos are because they beat some bad teams this year, but they've lost to good teams. Probably gonna take a big L here. Broncos 16.5 implied team total with the Chiefs 25 points implied at home. For the Broncos, look, Bo Nix has sort of had his spots this year where he's been a good start. I actually think he's a perfectly reasonable QB2 to have on your bench on the off chance you need him, more in Superflex or 2 QB. Perfectly reasonable. In one quarterback, 12 or 10 team leagues, I am not rolling him out there this week. I really would prefer not to. And then that's just because the Chiefs have been so good. Their running back room's a mess. They're saying they're going to get Estime more involved. Jaleel's had his weeks with touchdowns. Javonte had like a 2-week stretch of being featured. It's just a mess. I kind of want no business in the Broncos backfield. I maybe took 3 shares of Jaleel late in drafts this year. Luckily, had no Javonte, and I don't want any of that, man. I cut them all from my rosters. I don't want to guess who's going to be the guy, and neither should you. Just sit them all or cut them all or do whatever you have to do. Maybe keep Javonte for emergencies. Marvin Mims. Yes, sit Marvin Mims. And Vele, I know Vele's had some showings. Again, dude, this is just it is an issue of a low talent team where some guy might pop one week and maybe there's something to chase there. Guys will try to do it. I don't see the point. I would just rather not be involved. The only guy on the Broncos that is productive week in and week out for the most part is Cortland Sutton. Cortland Sutton's one of those, dude, he's just a crafty vet that doesn't go away. Even last year, man, he's just like a weirdly consistent dude who hangs in there, and you love having guys like that on your team. Do you start him every week and feel great about it? No. If you need to put him in there, if you're, he's most people, he's a wide receiver 4 or 5. If you're putting him in there, you have a good shot at like an 11 to 13 point half PPR week. That's really valuable in fantasy, man. It's not superstar valuable, but it's really valuable to have a depth piece on your bench like that. I actually had a crazy roster where I had to cut Cortland Sutton, Ridley, or DeAndre Hopkins. And I was like, oh God, I didn't know it was right after Ridley's hot week. I cut Sutton, and I sort of regret that. So he's a sort of tricky decision this week. I think he's going to have a perfectly good week. I think he's going to have a perfectly good rest of the year. I think once again, he was a great late round pick. So start him this week if you can. Get him in your flex, depending on what you have going on. For the Chiefs, Kelsey, I believe, has had back-to-back either 15 or 20 point weeks in half PPR. It looks like Kelsey's really coming around. It looks like they now have to lean on him. It looks like DeAndre Hopkins opened things up a little bit for him. If you bought Kelsey on the cheap, very potentially you're on league winner watch here, depending on what happens. Hunt, very soft rushing defense. I know he was questionable today after practice, but he's been questionable off and on for the last month. He's always showed up and played. Pacheco looks like he's going to miss at least another week, maybe another 2 or 3 weeks. So you're starting Hunt. Some back and forth with me and Ted about, is Mahomes a start here or is he more of a sort of tricky decision? But he's had back-to-back high-end performances. He was a QB1 2 weeks in a row after not being a QB1 for like 15 weeks since going back to like week 12 of last year. But it does look like, I don't know, looks like they're rolling offensively. They're a little more high output. It's translating to Mahomes a little bit. I don't know how, looked like he I don't know what he did last week. People were saying like it looked like a blown Achilles. It did not look like a blown Achilles. It looked like he tweaked something last week. So maybe you're going to miss a little bit of that rushing upside. It is a little bit of a tougher defense, but we know what the Chiefs do. He should get his points here, so we're starting him. And then Worthy and Hopkins. Worthy's only a sort of tricky decision because he draws the Surtain matchup, and Surtain is so good against those bigger dudes. He's really just a good player, man. I'm probably starting Hopkins in a few leagues. Zay Flowers just ate the Broncos alive last week. I'm starting him because of all the buys and because of all the injuries. But is he someone I'm forcing in my lineup or I'm ecstatic to get started? No, not really. Like even maybe this is a little too bearish, but like I'm starting Khalil Shakir over him. If Khalil goes, I would start Amari Cooper over him if Amari goes. That's sort of where I'm at with Hopkins. I think rest of the season is going to be great. I just think this is a really tough matchup. So he's a sort of tricky decision, but a perfectly reasonable start. And then the one thing that's noteworthy from this is Worthy. Worthy is a sit. I don't know what happened, man. He came out with his 30%. He's had a 30% target share from Mahomes before the DeAndre Hopkins trade. And that translated to like 7.5 PPR points per game or something like that. I know there was a big debate in the offseason. He was going, him, Brian Thomas Jr., and Lad McConkey were all going in the same range. And I remember one of Ted's favorite guys, David Gattieri, the browser guy on Twitter. He said, we're about a few months away from everyone realizing what a mistake they made taking Brian Thomas Jr. or Lad McConkey over Xavier Worthy. And I remember we sure? Because I did not prefer Xavier Worthy of those three. I took 2 Brian Thomas Jr., 2 Lad McConkey, 1 Worthy. So I kind of diffused it right. It just looks like he can't get off press coverage. He's incredibly talented with his speed, and they were using him in gadget plays, but he's not a fundamentally sound route runner. He can't get off press coverage, and it looks like Mahomes, I don't know, just doesn't trust him. Like the chemistry Mahomes instantly has with DeAndre Hopkins, to me, they have like a mind meld already. I would look to move Worthy before the trade deadlines in your league if anyone's convinced that he's going to be the guy at some point. I've already moved my Worthy share. You probably just don't want to be in the Worthy business, and that's a bummer. And I would say next year, if you hear people trying to sell it, I'm close to calling Worthy fantasy fool's gold. He's one of those dudes like on paper you see it, and I don't know if we're ever going to see it on the field at this point.
Yeah, my only feedback on Worthy, right? Like, especially with these Chiefs guys, they can stick from pass catchers, right? Like Rashee Rice had a terrible start not a terrible start to last year, but he came on in the second half of the year as
Yeah.
being into like the Rashee Rice that we know before he blew out his knee, right? It's not to say Xavier Worthy will never be anything, but I tend to agree with you right now. His production hasn't been good. He's struggling. We'll see if I think earning Mahomes' trust is like one of the most important things on this Chiefs team. Like we've seen talented guys. Like, do I want to call Kadarius Toney talented? Probably not as a wide receiver, but he was physically gifted in some aspects, right? Not be able to get it done. I think Worthy will probably be good for this Chiefs team eventually, but not as a fantasy option. And that's really all I had for this one. You did a good job. All right, next we got the Atlanta Falcons going into New Orleans to play the New Orleans Saints. It's just fired Dennis Allen. It took you guys 3 years too long, but you finally did it. It just took the Panthers beating you to finally pull the plug on that, I guess. The Falcons have an implied team total of 25 points, and the Saints have an implied team total of 21.5 points. For the Falcons, we are firing up every fantasy relevant option on the team. Bijan Robinson, Drake London if he goes, Kyle Pitts, Kirk Cousins, and Darnell Mooney. And then for the Saints, we are starting Alvin Kamara. We're tricky decisioning Taysom Hill, and we're sitting the rest. So let's start with the Saints here first. Listen, man, Derek Carr came back last week. I picked them as 7-point favorites to beat the Panthers. Outright loss. This team is a disaster right now. There's an argument to be made there. Potentially the worst team in the NFL. I still think the Panthers hold that crown, but the Saints are right up there, man. Um, Derek Carr, he's okay, right? Like when you have Chris Olave out there, there's reason to maybe like Derek Carr in spots, but this is not the spot without him out there. He's got like a bunch of Walmart cashiers running routes for him. No, thank you. Kamara is really the only one we trust here. The Falcons, they kind of spanked the Cowboys pretty good last week. I still think their defense has problems. I still think they're a very talented defense. It's just they struggle to, create interceptions, sack the quarterback, all of like the key plays that you need on defense, right? A lot of times they're just kind of giving up yards, not doing much. But they should have a good one here against this Saints team. And then Taysom Hill, he's kind of working as the running back too right now. This is kind of like the scumbag play if you want to try and put a quarterback in your tight end spot and bank on him falling into the end zone. Sure, you could do that. It's almost impossible to predict what the Saints will do with him though on any given week. So we can't go any more than a tricky decision there. Then for the Falcons, this Saints team, they're just toast. I mean, Dennis Allen, not a good head coach, but he was a defensive guy, right? They've just fired him. I don't see their defense getting any better here, and the Falcons' offense has sneakily looked very good here, right? So I would expect a big Bijan game. Great player, anyways, right? And great player, fantastic matchup. It seems like an eruption spot to me. Drake London, he got a hit pointer last week and he missed like he left in the first quarter against the Cowboys. He didn't come back the rest of the game. Right now he's questionable. I think it's like a true 50-50 if he goes or not. But if he plays based on what his production has been this year and the spot, I think you have to start him. But I would have him a little bit lower in terms of my weekly rankings than I typically would if he was fully healthy. Kirk, same thing, right? He's had points where he's looked really good. He's had points where he has not looked good. I think he's kind of like you got to target the good or the bad defenses to start him, and this is certainly one of them. Kyle Pitts, same deal. Like he's just a spotty player, but this looks like a good offensive spot for the Falcons to attack. So we want to start him too. Probably more so because tight end is just tough, right? Then Darnell Mooney. This is an interesting one. To me, if Drake London does not go, I love Darnell Mooney in this spot. I'm starting him in one league. I love his chances, especially if Drake London doesn't go play. I would look for maybe a 100-yard game from Darnell Mooney. I would not be shocked to see that. He has produced this year as the wide receiver two. Our meme has always been that he is like the world's best wide receiver two and not a good wide receiver one when he's been put in that spot. But man, I think anyone could do well against these Saints from a fantasy perspective. So this is the week you get him in your lineups, boys. Put him in there. Thoughts on this one, Yanni?
No, you got it, man. Not a lot to say about these guys.
This
Pretty
line
straightforward.
feels incredibly short to me for the old Atlanta Falcons. May have to pick against the home divisional dog yet again next week, but we'll see.
I think so. All right, man. We got our 49ers. 49ers with an implied team total of 28, highest implied team total of the week, versus the Buccaneers with an implied team total of 22.5 at home. For the Niners, pretty straightforward here, man. We're going to get some idea of what this offense looks like when everyone's out there. Okay. And we haven't really gotten that feel this year. And now Ayuk's not going to be out there, but I think between JJ, Pearsall, and Cowing, they actually will get some semblance of his production. So I'm calling it a complete offense, right? It's technically not. So we're starting Brock, Kittle, Debo, JJ. Those guys, I think going forward, I think Kittle's your locked in tight end one overall. I said it week one, I said it week two. I'm getting it going. With Kelsey falling off, I think Kittle needs to be recognized as the best tight end in the NFL right now. I think he will be the best tight end in the NFL for the next few years. And he's shown that this year. I believe he is the number one projected tight end in fantasy right now for at least across Yahoo's platforms. And then Brock, look, Brock is kind of a sneaky. He is leading, or it was, I don't know if he was after this year or after this week because he had the bye. He was leading the league in rushing first downs for the entire NFL, like including running backs. And he's had like sneaky rushing upside this year. They've shown a willingness to sneak the ball with him on the 1 yard line. He's been a really efficient, consistent player. I think if you have Brock in fantasy, man, like he's getting up there to like where he's a weekly start for me, but certainly in matchups like this, get him in your lineup. JJ, a lot of people forget JJ was the #1 overall player in fantasy for the 2 or 3 weeks he started with Ayuk out. I went and added him on every single roster I possibly could after the Ayuk injury. I am starting him on all the rosters I possibly can. I plan to start him for the rest of the season on all the rosters I possibly can. If you had a Chris Godwin roster, if you had a Rashee Rice roster and you were able to get him, which I actually did on 2 of those rosters, good for you, man. Get him in your lineup. Get him in there. Let's see how this plays out. I think there's a chance he's like a weekly top 24 guy. He's not Ayuk's level talent, but him and Brock's chemistry is amazing, man. And then Debo, league winner watch. Let's see how he looks this week. First week, totally healthy. He's had an up and down season. I hope you bought on him when we asked you to all month. I think it starts to show up here. I really do. And then we have CMC on a tricky decision because Ted's an ass. Look, he's are you really tricky decisioning CMC? Come on, guys. We all know me and Ted are playing in a league against each other where I haven't had CMC all year, and he will be out there against old Teddy boy. I think it's right to say, though, he did rightly point out, do we think we get the full load CMC here? I don't think so. I think he probably gets 15, 16 touches at the absolute most, but he can do a lot with 15, 16 touches. And if those are red zone touches, he can do an awful lot. The Niners went from the most efficient red zone offense in the NFL last year to one of the least efficient this year, even though they're getting to the red zone at a significantly higher rate. What that spells for me is massive touchdown equity for CMC when he's rolling. Maybe it doesn't happen this week. Maybe it does. He will be load managed to some degree. And then we thought it was worth mentioning. Don't start Mason anymore. Do not drop him. Don't drop him, but don't start Mason anymore. Pearsall, what happens with Pearsall? I know some people were saying they think he's going to slide into the wide receiver 2 role. I really don't think so. I'm not sure, but I just doesn't feel like what they want to do. To me, because JJ's the bigger guy, even though he's been their slot, I don't know what they prefer, right? If they might want to keep JJ in the slot. They might want to move Pearsall outside or vice versa. Pearsall's been in the slot in 3 wide receiver sets since JJ's been out. I certainly for this week, don't start him. I don't know how much you even need to keep him on your roster in 10 and 12 man leagues with Juwan and CMC coming back. That is a lot of target share soaked up. We'll see. He's a sit for us this week. For the Buccaneers, Baker's been too good to sit, man. I don't care if his receivers are missing. He had another productive showing last week against one of the best defenses in the NFL, a defense that unfortunately is better than the Niners, if we're being honest here, right? He looked really good. Cade Otton looked amazing. White looked amazing. I think these 3 guys are getting close, basically our weekly starts for the rest of the season. Otton has top 3 upside every week. Rachaad White, any game where they're trailing is going to have a massive target share without Godwin in there. He is their short passing game in a lot of these situations. He's a terrible runner, but he works the gaps in the defense really nicely once he gets the balls in his hand in the passing game. So look, I love White this week. I love him any week where you think they're trailing. He has a really nice soft schedule rest of the season. And then Baker, yeah, I'm starting Baker with confidence. Look, here's some cheeky ones, man. If you guys want to be a little tricky, Bucky, look, the Niners don't have the best rush defense. They don't like getting mashed on run plays. So Bucky could end up getting in the end zone here. He's a really punishing runner that likes to work in between the tackles. It profiles as a potentially good game for him. I just wonder if they're going to be trailing too much to really run the ball. That's why he's a tricky decision for us. And then Sterling Shepard. I actually love Sterling Shepard as a streamer this week. I think they're going to be behind. I think they're going to be passing a lot. Charvarius Ward, condolences to his family. I don't want to say that that's why he hasn't been playing well. I'm not at all implying that. He's been injured this year, most of this year, but he also just had a family tragedy. I don't know. I think he's playing this week. I don't know. I wouldn't blame him.
He is playing this week. He went to Dallas today, though, so he's going to be back with the team and ready to roll.
So absolutely devastating. He lost his, I think, 1 or 2-year-old daughter, right? So I'm not saying that's why he has not been good this week. He's had knee and hip and like hamstring injuries that he's been dealing with all year. He hasn't been great. And I like Sterling. I think Sterling Shepard is a really sneaky upside play, whether it's in DFS or whether it's in play. I have one league actually against Ted where my roster's all injured. I'm rolling Sterling Shepard out there in the flex. I think in full PPR, he actually might have a real good game. So he's actually closer to a start for me, but that's probably a little bullish. I think this is going to be one of those times where everything falls the right way. The injuries, the game script, the team he's playing. I actually think it'll be a nice game for Sterling.
Yeah, man. Good shot on Sterling Shepard, right? I was So full disclosure, to the fans, I almost picked the Chiefs like -9 on that Monday night game. I thought that it was entirely on the table that Baker kind of crumbled and tried to play hero ball without Godwin and Evans out there. He looks like he's playing great football to me. I like this spot for him, especially in what is profiling to be a negative game script. And then I just want to go touch on the CMC thing, right? Like, listen, I'm not saying don't start him. I like honestly, he probably should be a start. I'm just saying be careful. Be careful, right? Because what we've seen Kyle Shanahan do with CMC is just workhorse the shit out of him. Last year I was in one league. I was drafting 3 overall, and CMC was on the board at 3. And this was kind of before we saw a full CMC workhorse season. I thought they were going to load manage him, and I drafted Saquon over him that year. And that obviously Saquon was on the Giants, so that ended up being a terrible pick, right? CMC goes on to win Offensive Player of the Year. It has nothing to do with CMC, the player. I just, especially with Achilles tendonitis, where the number one thing is you want rest, right? Like I would not be shocked to see 10 to 12 touches here for CMC, maybe even less. I don't know. I just worry about that. Right now, ECR has him as the running back 12. I would say, yeah, I would kind of lean towards that, right? Anywhere from 12 to 20, and he has the upside to be a league winner for you this week. We just felt, or I guess more so I just felt that we had to put that out there. Don't get don't get too excited, but glad to have him back for the Niners. Jeez, man, we missed him. We need him for this run here, this end of season run. All right, next we got my favorite team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and my favorite quarterback, Russell Wilson, going into Washington to play the 7-2 Commanders. The Steelers have an implied team total of 21.5 points, and the Commanders have an implied team total of 24 points. For the Steelers, we're starting George Pickens and Najee Harris, and we're tricky decisioning Russ, much to my chagrin, the Muth, and Jalen Warren. Then for the Commanders, we are starting Jaden Daniels, Scary Terry, and Zach Ertz. 50 years old, still in the start column. We are sitting Austin Eckler, and we're tricky decisioning Brian Robinson Jr. So let's start with the Commanders first, because I think I'm going to have more to say about the Steelers. Okay week last week against the Giants. I don't think the Commanders played their best, but they still had over a 5-point win against a divisional opponent, right? And they've just had the dream season. Jaden Daniels is completely for real. He's top 5 fantasy quarterback rest of the way. I'm not scared enough by this Steelers defense to say don't start him, and I don't know if there's ever a situation he would not be in our start column unless something significant happens. Scary Terry, he didn't have that much work last week. He only had 2 targets and 2 catches for 2 touchdowns, so he got you there. I think, I don't know. At least for me, I'm noticing when I watch the Commanders that Terry is not on the field at all times. To me, the way I drafted him was like he's going to be on the field 100% of the time type of wide receiver. He hasn't been that, but Jaden has been so good, and Terry is his go-to guy, right? So deep play on the deep balls, it's almost always going to be Scary Terry. He's the guy they look for in the end zone. I think that Cliff Kingsbury, like last week in an interview, he goes, "Yeah, when all the chips are down, it's going to Terry." So start him with confidence here. I have him as a high end wide receiver too for this week. And then Zach Ertz. It's not sexy, but it's production, and it's pretty consistent production in the tight end wasteland. I think he's liable to go for 6 to 8 points, which at this point is like low end tight end 1 to high end tight end 2 status. You could do worse than him. Brian Robinson is being tricky decision by us this week, simply because it's going to be his first week off the hamstring injury. It's We'll see how much work he gets. Is he going to be full speed? Is he going to be running a little gingerly? I don't know. I don't particularly like the talent that is Brian Robinson. I like the situation and usage of Brian Robinson. So when he's not fully healthy and against what is a good defense in aspects. I don't feel comfortable enough as a full blown start. He's like a flex for me this week. And then Eckler, this is just kind of based on the idea that the Commanders should be up in this game, should be kind of playing a little bit more conservatively. I would assume running the ball in between the tackles if they get a lead, kind of trying to take the air out of the ball, right? Eckler, he kind of makes his bread like on those short dump offs. I think that with Brian Robinson being back, right, his snap percentage is going to be down. He's not going to be out on the field as much, and it's just asking too much at this point, I think. So I would sit him. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, listen, man, this Commanders defense is playing better, but they're very concentrated right now in the passing game at a minimum. George Pickens, he's the king of the almost catch. I told this to Yanni earlier in the season. I'm not sure if he believed it, but now I think I've converted him. I've never seen a guy make more acrobatic almost catches that he either doesn't have full possession or only one foot's in bounds or it gets pulled back on a 60-yard penalty. The theory of this player is elite. Like he has all the talent in the world. My issue with him is that Russell Wilson is his quarterback and he's just not polished. Is the Commanders' defense really improved to the point where this is a negative matchup for the Steelers? I don't think so. I think this is still a positive matchup, and if Russ can have a good game here, it will most likely be Pickens that's going to be the one profiting off of that. So start him with medium confidence, I'd say. Then Najee, listen, man, Najee's had a good couple weeks. Obviously, the Steelers had the bye last week, but the previous 2 weeks, Najee looks about the best that I've ever seen him play. I have been brutal on this guy. I've said I think he's slow and untalented. I think that the Steelers should. I was saying the Steelers should trade for ETN. I thought that more than a wide receiver, they needed a legitimate running back on this team, based on their roster construction. Najee's proven me wrong these last 2 weeks. Is he capable of like just kind of reverting to his rookie season Najee rest of the year? He could. I don't know. I tend to not like this player, but he's getting all the work right now out of the backfield, right? Jalen Warren is just change of pace at this point. The usage is running back one usage. There's no doubt about it. I have him as a RB2 this week. Then tricky decision, Russ. He has gotten at least 18 fantasy points the last 2 weeks, right? Like there has been there have been worse fantasy quarterbacks over that period of time. It's not that. It's just that how much do you want to buy that this Russell Wilson thing is going to continue to work out? I am of the opinion that he is still not a good football player at this point, and he is washed, and that will come out sooner rather than later. This is a gettable matchup in theory, though. There are buys this week. You might be forced to do it in Superflex. I don't love the start. The Steelers seem to think that he's like reverted to old Russell Wilson. Don't, no, we're not there, but it's not disgusting enough to call him a sit at this point. Same with Muth. Muth is a good player, right? Like to me, the passing offense, Pickens and Muth are the two big ones, but it's just that he's attached to Russ, man. It's a tough sell for me. I could see it if you need to, especially at the tight end position, but you could do better too, I think. And then Jalen Warren, this is just kind of if you think the Steelers are going to be trailing in this game and they're going to be giving him dump offs. He's kind of like the Austin Eckler of the Steelers offense to me. I've called him a scat back before. I preseason there were some people that bought in that he was going to be like take over the job from Najee. I was never there just on the talent, but he has looked decent over the past 2 weeks. I think he had like 60 yards rushing last week. Granted, it was in like a dominating game where he got some work. I don't know though. I wouldn't feel any better than tricky decision, and I would say a low end tricky decision for me there. Thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't know if you have a roster that's really decimated, maybe you have to start Warren. But I think in PPR he might get 10 points. It's not whatever. No, no, you're good.
For the record, I have a roster that has Saquon and Jonathan Taylor, my two champions. If either of them go down, I had Zach Moss get injured. Warren's the next man up for me. So please stay healthy, boys.
Good luck to you. Okay, Titans at Chargers. Titans with an implied team total of 15 and a half. Chargers with an implied team total of 23. Man, we're seeing that Jim Harbaugh, what do you want to call it? That Jim Harbaugh shine coming through on these Chargers, man. They are not a particularly talented roster. And for them to be playing the type of football they're playing, where they're kicking the teeth in on bad teams and competing with good teams, is really impressive. But for the Titans, look, you have exactly what you hope for in fantasy. If you're going to dumpster dive on teams, you need them to be hyper concentrated. You want to know exactly where their passing yards and exactly where their rushing yards are going. It's really risky to buy into an offense that is probably not going to be a high output offense. Someone like the Denver Broncos with Cortland Sutton, right? Well, especially since DeAndre Hopkins left, it feels like that is what we have here with the Titans in their passing and their rushing game. I know Spears has been out, and Spears, I believe, is questionable to come back this week. Good chance he comes back this week. He didn't hit IR, so he's reaching that point where he should be back like this week or next week. But Pollard and Ridley have really been their guys. Ridley seems to be their preferred target in the passing game. They went out and paid him, I think, in the first few days of free agency, like 18 million a year. I would assume if they did that, he's the guy they want to be featuring. And they've done a much better job of that. I believe he had like 18 and 9.7 and half PPR after DeAndre was traded. So you're starting Pollard, you're starting Ridley. Again, Ridley for me, he's a start relative to where he's been all year. Like, am I it would actually be a very close call for me between DeAndre Hopkins, who draws the certain matchup, and Ridley this week, right? So he's like pushed up into that tier of guys where he's going to compete with guys that are normally a tier above him because of the game script this week. They should have to pass a pretty good amount because of the workload, because of the less talented secondary he's facing. I'm perfectly comfortable starting Ridley where you have to. And Pollard, I mean, I don't think you can sit him at this point, right? Yeah, you feel good about both of those guys. And then Herbert, Ladd, and Dobbins are going to be our starts from the Chargers. There's some debate about who their premier pass catcher is on that team. We've had weeks where Quentin Johnston's the one going out. I know we just had Shark come back from injury. He was out there last week. There's maybe some debate, right? Palmer's even had a week or two. To me, what this team really looks like, though, ultimately, is it has been the process of Ladd and Herbert getting their connection down, becoming really comfortable with each other. Ladd is the guy that they picked out for this team. They inherited the other guys, and that's perfectly fine. They may have signed DJ Shark this offseason. I don't remember. But they inherited most of these other guys. That's perfectly reasonable. But they went out and got Ladd. Jim Harbaugh saw Ladd McConkey play in college and said, that's the dude. He's compared him to Steve Smith on this team, okay? He's a really physical run blocker. He's a really fundamentally sound player. He's playing inside, outside. He's making contested catches, back shoulder catches on the outside. He's got a big touchdown going. We're treating Ladd like he's their one. He has not produced like a one in fantasy overall, but I do believe he's the one here. I do believe he has a big week this week. That's how we're appraising it. Dobbins, I've sort of been trashing Dobbins this year. I thought after week 4 or 5 he would fall off, and he became spotty after week 4 or 5. But I was probably wrong at this point. It looks like he's at least going to stick, probably for this season. Who knows? Does he become the first player ever to fully rebound from an Achilles tear? He might be. He's on pace to be. And I'm going to keep targeting him in matchups like this. I don't, he doesn't look that explosive to me. He doesn't look like the player he used to be to me anymore. Does that really matter when they're this committed to running the ball and when they're getting him in the red zone that often? Probably doesn't. And it's not just the red. He's had explosive plays too. So I don't know. I'm taking half an L on that one, probably closer to a full L, but we're getting there. He's a start. You're sitting the other wide receivers, and then Disley. Disley's popped a little bit the last month. I don't hate. I mean, if it's full PPR and you're throwing a dart, fine. I started Conklin, who got 0.7 for me in full PPR 2 weeks ago. So when I had a buy, so I sure roll Disley out as a sort of tricky decision. It can't be worse than Conklin last week.
I got a couple on this, and it is just on the two quarterbacks. So for the Chargers, to me, I think Justin Herbert is kind of looking to be more healthy. He's had 2 really good weeks in a row now. I think we could see like the Justin Herbert we've seen for the majority of his NFL career here down the stretch. If he's on your waiver wires, I am begging you to go pick this guy up if you can afford the spot. He could be a league winner for like a zero QB roster down the stretch. And on that note, right, Ladd McConkey, I think that by the end of the season, he's going to be in wide receiver 2 locked in status. Like, I think that I really like the way Ladd is projecting with Herbert's health and improved play over the past couple weeks. And same with the other wide receivers. I don't know who it's going to be, but if Herbert is starting to get it going, right, and he starts playing like the Herbert we know he is, I think there's going to be value here in the other wide receivers. I just don't know who it's going to be. Does the Quentin Johnston thing stick? Is DJ Chark still relevant? Is it Joshua Palmer, the no-name guy who just produces? Hard to say. I would keep your eyes on it though. I think that there could be a free agent wide receiver pickup there in the coming weeks. And then for the Titans, um, from what I was reading, Will Levis is questionable. I don't know if the Titans would start him if he's in there. If for any reason you see Will Levis as the starter for the Tennessee Titans, I like Ridley a far, like way less than I would like him with Mason Rudolph. And that's not to say that Mason Rudolph is a great quarterback. That's just I don't know what the hell is going on with Will Levis. We've seen games with Will Levis this year where Ridley's gotten like 8 targets for 0 catches, right? I would say if Will Levis plays in any capacity, Ridley becomes a tricky decision leaning towards sit for me until I see it. But just keep your eyes on it, fantasy managers. Still a full start with Mason Rudolph in there. All right, next we got the New York Jets going to Arizona to play the surprising NFC West leading Cardinals. The Jets have an implied team total of 23.5 points, and the Cardinals have an implied team total of 22 points. For the Jets, we're starting Aaron Rodgers, Brees Hall, Garrett Wilson, and Devontae Adams, and we're tricky decisioning Conklin. And for the Cardinals, we're starting Kyler, James Conner, Trey McBride, and Marvin Harrison Jr., and we're sitting the rest of them. So let's start with the Cardinals first. Listen, they haven't been like a prolific passing offense. That I don't think their offense has looked prolific as it could look with these guys. But we like them in this spot. I don't think the Jets are as scary of a defensive matchup as they used to be. I kind of chalked that good performance on Thursday last week against the Texans up to the Texans just being hurt, right? So Kyler, right? I like him here, especially with the rushing upside. He should be a locked and loaded QB1 this week. James Conner, just a consistently good player, man. He's not the sexiest player, but he's tough. He's tough. He'll run into guys. He gets the extra yards. He does everything you want to see from a running back. Trey McBride is a target monster. I have him top 5 to top 3 tight end rest of the season. This should be a good spot for him. And then Marvin Harrison Jr. There was a little bit of discussion in the free Tendies pre-show about where to put him this week. He should be getting Sauce Gardner here, which historically has not been a great matchup for a wide receiver. And Marvin Harrison Jr. has been spotty at points this year. I think that Sauce is at a point where he's just injured and not looking right. I think he went down twice on the Thursday night game against the Texans with various injuries. He's banged up. We just can't quit the talent that is Marvin Harrison. We're riding the roller coaster. I like the spot here, especially in what should be a pretty close matchup. I think Kyler should have a good one here. We like Marvin Harrison. Start him. Then for the Jets, listen, man, are they all the way back? I don't think so, but I think that Devontae Adams is finally integrated into this offense enough where we're going to start Rodgers this week in a mid to good matchup for a defense. I don't. I have a hard time deciding where I'm at with these Cardinals. I think that they're not a very talented defense, but I think that they're schemed well, right? Do I think that Rodgers is like a top 10 quarterback this week? No, but low end one, I would say. Like he's worth a stream this week, or at least worth the shot. Brees Hall, he's been a little disappointing this year, but he's still RB1 based on the usage and the matchup. Garrett Wilson, he got home twice last week. He had the amazing Jordan catch. I think that might have been better than Odell Beckham. I'm not sure. I tend to think that catch was just as good, right? But Garrett Wilson has been delivering at ADP finally. I know it was a long wait for fantasy managers to get there. It felt bad at points this year, but I think that Garrett Wilson top 10 fantasy wide receiver the rest of the way. And then Devontae Adams, he had 11 targets last week. He is getting looked at constantly by Rodgers. Rodgers missed him on a long one on Thursday night. Is Rodgers Is the Rodgers-Adams connection as good as it used to be? No. Do I prefer Garrett Wilson to Devontae Adams at this point in time? As a fantasy option and just as a football player? Yes. But Devontae Adams, you drafted him high. He's got his quarterback now. Everything should be okay with him. I think you're fine starting him here in this spot. And then tricky decision Conklin. If you feel like the dart throw, this is a decent spot to do it. I would lean towards sit for Conklin, honestly, but in theory, he could get it done here.
Okay, not a whole lot to say about this game. Really boring from a start 'em sit 'em perspective. Eagles going to the Cowboys. Eagles with an implied team total of 24 and three quarter. Cowboys with an implied team total of 17 and three quarters. I was surprised to only see -7 on this game. If it stays that way, you will be seeing this game on my bets on Friday. But for the Eagles, there's really not a whole. I mean, what do you really say about the game, right? Start everyone. Start everyone. I would say for the rest of the season with the Eagles, just start everyone. If you bought a piece of this offense, you're extremely happy. You're riding them to championships. Um, Continue doing so. Don't overthink it. For the Cowboys, CD is really the only locked in startable asset on this roster with Cooper Rush in there. With the report of Dak potentially having the hamstring rip off the bone, it sounds like. I don't know if we see him the rest of this year. I highly doubt it. At least I would be surprised. Does that lead to some sort? It's funny we didn't even list him here because that was such damaging news to the team. Does that lead to some sort of uptick in volume for Rico Dowdle? Does he start getting all these dump offs and all these runs up the middle? I don't. To me, especially in this matchup, he's not a fantasy relevant asset. I think we have to be seriously concerned that Rico Dowdle drops off altogether as being fantasy relevant, and that's really a shame. He was one of the sharper picks you could have made, man. And round 12, 13, like that was a really good call, and it just doesn't matter now. This is the year of the injury. It's where we're at. So CD though, CD was okay with Rush. He wasn't nothing. He wasn't great. You know, high end wide receiver two with low end wide receiver one upside if he goes. He might not go this week with a shoulder. And then Tolbert and Ferguson, this is purely a matter of game script and for Ferguson a positional value. Tolbert should get 5 to 7 targets. Maybe that'll be worth something. I don't know. Much closer to a sit than a start, but that's what sort of tricky decisions are. Ferguson, if you have someone on your roster, like if you went and picked up a Kate Otten, which maybe you didn't do if you had Ferguson on your roster to begin with, right? You're going to start Kate Otten over him. I would start Zach Ertz over him this week. I would start Mike Gesicki over Ferguson this week. And I love Ferguson. It's just, I just don't, do we get anything reliable out of him? It's really hard to feel like you do, especially just in this matchup and everything. But they will be behind. He will get a target share, probably a sizable one, potentially the second largest target share on the team. You know, really a shame for the Cowboys. For they have fantasy relevant assets and a lot of guys that people winning on, and it feels like the season derailed, and it feels like it's only going to get harder now that they're paying Dak and CD a combined $99 million a year. We'll see. Good luck.
Yeah, tough spot for the Cowboys. I think that it's completely Jover for them with Dak being out. The only thing I wanted to hit on the Cowboys was the Rico Dowdle thing. To me, he's a tricky decision this week just based on the fact that it is going to be Cooper Rush. And I think I've said all year that this Cowboys team has no interest in running the ball right, and they're a Dak and CD team. But I think there's opportunity for them to kind of change their philosophy without Dak in there, right? Like, do you want to be a Cooper Rush centric football team? I don't know. We'll see what Mike McCarthy does, but Rico Dowdle, he had a good week last week against the Falcons. I like the player. I like him as like a low end too. This week is where I would put him. And then only other note I have on this one is we are a Cooper Rush ankle twist away from seeing Trey Lance again. Cowboys get him in there, give him a chance. I'm rooting for that kid. He got shafted by the Niners. Granted, probably shouldn't have been the starter. He got screwed by where he got drafted, right? Like just he shouldn't have gone as 3 overall, but I like the kid. He's high character guy. I think that especially if this goes sideways for the Cowboys, you should at least see what you got with him before you let him walk. All right, next we got the Detroit Lions going into Houston to play the Texans. The Lions have an implied team total of 26.5 points, and the Texans have an implied team total of 23 points. For the Lions, we're STDing Sam Laporta and JMO, and we're starting everyone else. And for the Texans, we are a tricky decision, or we're starting CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Joe Mixon, and we're tricky decisioning Dr. Schultz. So Let's start with the Texans first. Listen, it was if you are a CJ Stroud roster, it did not feel good last week for sure. But the good news is we have the best wide receiver in the entire NFL, Nico Collins, returning to the lineup. The force multiplier, apparently. I didn't see that one. I think I missed on it this offseason, not drafting him anywhere. But listen, man, CJ looks comfortable with Nico out there, and Nico has looked great. Like he was getting compared to Andre Johnson earlier in the year. He's an absolute boost to this Texans offense. I think they're going to be looking a lot closer to the offense that we thought they would look like coming into this year, right? So start them with the utmost confidence. Tank Dell, I think he had like 150 receiving yards last week. He popped off with everybody else out. I think that he's not going to see that type of usage this week, right? But he should be by far the second best wide receiver on the field against a Lions team that they are the way you attack them is through the air. He's attached to CJ Stroud. I really like Tank Dell this week. Fire him up with the utmost confidence. And then Joe Mixon, man. I say this every week. He looks as slow as molasses to me, but he has some of the best vision I've ever seen a running back have. Like he just has this way of finding holes and consistently grinding out 5 to 10 yard carries. Dude's dude's as consistent as it could be right now. I think he's like averaging almost 20 points per game in fantasy. Feel free to check me on that. I could be wrong there, but I think it is like almost 20 points per game in fantasy where he started. So it just is what it is. We're starting him even against a really good rush defense in the Detroit Lions. Then Dr. Schultz. This is just kind of we liked the player the entire time, right? It just the reason we've been sitting him for so long and we've been telling you to sit him is because of all the wide receivers that came to Houston, right? With Diggs, with Dell, and with Collins in the mix, like Schultz was just a distant fourth or fifth option on the team. Now that Diggs isn't in the mix anymore, we like his chance to get a couple more looks. You're attached to CJ. You could do worse at the position. Then for the Lions, I think that let's start with the STDs first. Sam Laporta and JMO. Listen, man, it is tough. It is tough out here for us Sam Laporta managers. He's produced like I was telling Yanni this earlier in the week. He's produced like a free agent pickup tight end. At this point in the year, I think both of his touchdowns on the year were on designed gimmick plays as well, which is not what you drafted in the fourth round at all. That being said, though, this Lions offense is just too good at this point, right? I don't think we're going to tell you to sit Sam Laporta based on the draft position and based on the offense that he's in, but it's got to be a week where he gets targets to get there. The good news is they're in a dome. Jared Goff plays a little bit better in a dome, and we have our JMO situation, which we'll get into here in a second. Do I like Sam Laporta as a locked-in tight end one this week? No, I have him as probably a low end one. I think 5 to 10 points is probably the most likely outcome, but just use your best judgment. If you really feel like you can sit Laporta, do it if you need to. But he's not a stinker. He's not a bad. He didn't just become magically a bad player, right? He's just not getting the looks. Then Jameson. He's finally finished with his 2 game suspension. He got arrested with like guns in his car. No, no, sorry, my bad. I got ahead of myself. He had a 2 game suspension for PEDs. So he's back from that. But now during that time he was suspended. There was the viral video that came out of him getting pulled over by the police with like multiple guns in his car. The NFL is investigating this situation. Even though he's off suspension, right? He has not gotten resuspended, but they issued an exemption for him. So the Lions have a slot. They can sit him if they want to sit him. For fantasy managers, first of all, Jameson is already kind of a boom or bust player, but it is entirely on the board that he gets benched this week. The main reason he's a tricky decision is if you're a Jameson manager, Jameson Williams fantasy manager, you need to check. You need to check and see what the status is. You need to keep your pulse on the beat reports. If you get any wind that Jameson is going to be out this week or Dan Campbell might discipline him, leave him on your bench. But if you're hearing from I don't know the beat reporters that Jameson's going to play, all of a sudden he becomes like a wide receiver 3 flex option. So just keep that in mind before you roll him out there. You really need to pay attention to that one because I don't know what's going on. I don't think anybody knows what's going on except for the people in the Detroit locker room about what's going to happen with him. Thoughts on this one, Yanni?
I would just say that Dell is one of my favorite starts this week. I think Dell's a tremendous start this week with his price on DraftKings and the game script. And I think he's going to be a stud rest of season if he's their wide receiver too, which he obviously will be.
He was an excellent buy low. If you did that and
Yeah.
kind of made it through the rough patch, I think this is where you're going to make your money.
Okay, Dolphins at the Rams, the Jimmy Garoppolo factor. Dolphins, 24.5 point implied team total. Rams with a 26 point implied team total. Look, the Dolphins have Tua back. I know Waddle screwed you last week. He is a start for us this week. Tua's a start. Hill, A-Chain. This is a really bad defense. And actually, Smith is on our start list for potential streamers, man. I think Smith is a perfectly reasonable streamer this week. He's had a pretty good season, actually, overall. He's been pretty consistent. Um, you know, cool guy to look to if you're poking around with buys. Totally think you should give a shot in his direction. There's really not a lot to say. I don't know what happened with the Dolphins this year. I really don't. Their defense actually looks like it's playing a little bit better than it was last year, even though it's a less talented defense. They lost an O lineman or two. Maybe that was what did it. Tua got injured, but even since Tua's been back, I don't know what's going on. There's really bad vibes in Miami. Whatever it is, there were talks that they were going to sell Tyreek Hill at the deadline. I don't know, but I think you're starting all these guys right in any given week, except for Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith is not a weekly start, but the big guys. I mean, Waddle is probably one of those guys where we're going to be really judicious with him going forward. He's a start this week because of how wide receivers have busted up this Rams secondary. If he does not go off this week, if we don't get and not even go off, if we don't get like a good 11, 12 half PPR points this week, I'm willing to call him either a sit or a tricky decision on good matchups going forward. And like on a few rosters I have him, I will just not put him in my starting line. I will start guys like George Pickens or DeAndre Hopkins over him rest of season if he doesn't go off here. He will be in my lineup this week, but man, he's got to figure it out. And I think he does figure it out this week. But if he doesn't, it just looks like that was a blown draft pick. Nothing to do about it. But start for us this week. And then Mostert, sort of tricky decision. I think he had like 7 carries for 66 yards or something. We checked before this. I don't recall exactly, but it was like 55 or 65 yards. Last week, he had 2 touchdowns on like 18 yards the week before that. He's still getting used enough and he's still involved enough that, like, if you need an emergency start at running back, I would put him in there. I don't know if he's someone I'm actively looking to start. If, A-Chain goes down, that'll change. I he's a fine running back 4 or 5 to keep on your bench, but I don't know how aggressively you want to be plugging him into your rosters, even with the bad matchup. If they have a game where they're projected to have a really serious lead, I'm actually totally comfortable flexing him. And then for the Rams, everyone else besides Parkinson and Jimmy Garoppolo are starts on this Rams team. Parkinson, he looked good for a week or two. It looked sort of interesting. We had him on an ad list from the free agent wire. Tight end's too deep this year. I don't really think he's useful in any meaningful way. Stafford has actually put together a really nice last few weeks. He's got both of his weapons back, even with Puka getting ejected. The Rams passing game just looks healthy. It looks really good. It looks like it's functioning really well. Stafford is one of the smoothest operators to ever do it at the position. And this is a game that's going to force them to pass, I would think, even though Kyron should do really well. Kyron Williams, probably going to be correlated with some of the most championship wins this year. If you took him in that like pick 15 to 20 range where he was going, I think he's the running back 3 on the season. He's just been a really tremendous player for you. You're never sitting him. You're never sitting Kupp. You're never sitting Puka. And Stafford, if Puka and Kupp stay healthy, Stafford is someone who I'm going to want on my rosters as my QB2 to throw in there in good matchups, and I think he gets it done this week.
Yeah, definitely. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua being in the lineup, right? I think it just fundamentally changes this Rams team to the point where they went from the absolute seller of the NFC West to being live to winning the division, right? When you have the quarterback head coach combo that is Stafford and McVay, they can do more with less, right? And when you give them 2 stud wide receivers, it's going to be tough, especially for this Dolphins team that has struggled so much, right? To kind of look like themselves from last year, even. Then the only other comment I have on this, I will just continue to harp on this. I think that Mostert's not going anywhere, right? So last week there were 22 carries out of the backfield from the Dolphins. Achane handled 12 of them. Mostert got 10 of them, right? And Mostert was relatively efficient on those carries. So is like just purely running the ball in between the tackles is concerned. I think they're very close to the same player. Where Achane is really separating from Mostert are these targets, right? I wonder, because I believe Achane had like 8 targets last week. Every week that Tua's been in, he's been getting you there on these targets and touchdowns, right? I wonder if Waddle is suffering at the expense of Achane getting the targets. It could just be a situation where they got too many mouths to feed, right? With a quarterback that he makes the offense go, but he's not Patrick Mahomes, right? Not everyone is eating every week. I don't know. But I think Mostert would be a really nice bench piece to have, just from a handcuff perspective and from a, hey, I need 7 to 10 points from my flex position. I can put Mostert in there and feel good about it. He's going to get plenty of opportunity. A-Chain's the one you want to start, but Mostert is still there, right? And I believe this is Monday night, is it not? So I think that's it for us. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a good question that I was thinking of when you talked about Will Levis playing. So you were you wrapping it up?
Yeah. We'll call it here. If you made it through the whole video, thank you. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell. It really helps the channel out. Yanni has claimed the question. What is it, my friend?
I was trying to think what starting quarterback would I trust less to watch my kids than Will Levis. He might be 32. He might be starting quarterback, right? So you have like Joe Flacco has 3 kids, very comfortable, right? Tua's a nice Polynesian gentleman. I trust him with my kids, no worries. Brock, could you imagine Brock Purdy? You know, he'd probably hug your kid and make him a
Elite
little.
babysitter. Elite
Oh,
babysitter. Yeah.
oh my God, like Stafford, total dad, right? Will Levis, Jameis Winston, not close. I feel like Jameis would be able to have a great time with your kid. I don't know if there's a quarterback I trust less than Will Levis, a starting quarterback with my kid in the NFL. Think about it. I'm curious. Is he last place? I'd like to know.
Well, does Deshaun Watson still count? Or is he out
No,
of the running now?
we're doing starters. No, 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 no.
All right. And we'll catch you guys for the gambling episode.
Thank you.